Hello everyone, this is part 31 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Both Naruto and Tayuya were smiling as they finally got the opportunity to stretch their legs in earnest as they dashed across the desert, using what they knew of the terrain to make it across quickly. Finally they saw the strangely obvious border between the land of wind and the land of rain, made more blatant by the light rain that began to fall around them. The two of them made more cautious and steady progress after that, traveling as civilians would to keep suspicion off them. Naruto was already amazed by the variety they saw from the new country. Despite the ever-present rainfall, people went about their lives. There were a few sparsely populated villages spread out through the outskirts of the country, mostly farms and rice paddies. The geography itself was also quite varied. Hills, valleys, streams and rivers dotted the land, and Naruto could even make out the vague shape of a mountain range in the distance. However, despite the beauty of the country around them, both shinobi couldn't help but feel it was dampened by the weather. Used to living in a desert where water was a commodity almost as valuable as gold, the two just weren't used to seeing so much rain, even if they hadn't always lived in Suna. The natives seemed indifferent to it, or strangely in some cases grateful for some reason. The two were on an information gathering mission, so they asked discreet questions every now and then. Most of the time the people were fairly guarded, but it was in vain anyway. Apparently the flow of information was tightly controlled from a megacore itself, as many people still believed Hanzo to be in control. The two gave up, believing that either the people were playing dumb in hopes they would move on or genuinely didn't know anything. In either case they figured their search would be more fruitful in the village itself, not that they thought infiltration of a foreign village was going to be easy. They trudged on through the country, their respective spirits becoming more oppressed by the ceaseless and seemingly worsening rain that darkened the sky and flooded the roads, even if they were incredibly irrigated. That was another thing Naruto noticed. It wasn't all that prevalent in the outlying villages, but as they drew closer to the capital he began noticing the strange architecture of the country. It became painfully obvious when the two finally rounded the crest of a hill, only to look on in slight awe at the sight in front of them, the rain-swept city of Megakure no Sato. Tall spindly towers of metal climbed into the air, each seemingly competing with those closest to it like trees in a forest. Everywhere you looked there was piping, taking away the rain that fell constantly and safely transporting it through the city's massive sewer system. In all, Naruto thought it reminded him of what his mindscape used to look like, if it was a city instead of an underground sewer. In fact, it was almost uncanny. The two stayed there for a while, discussing the best entrances into the village while simultaneously deciding that the main entrance was out. They may have been discreet and almost non-existent in the rest of the country, but the shinobi presence in Am itself was more than obvious. They seemed well organized and well trained, performing routine checks on everybody entering or leaving the village through the conventional ways. It was just a good thing that Naruto wasn't a very conventional person. If citizens of a megacore had looked up that particular day, they might have seen a lonely falcon fly furiously through the downpour that pervaded their lives. It dodged through the tall, haphazardly designed buildings, using the darkness provided by the cloud coverage to mask its flight. It settled down in the most deserted alleyway it could find, floating down to a graceful stop on the ground. If anybody had looked close, they might have noticed the strange patterns drawn on the creature's back in what seemed to be ink. Suddenly the entire bird just glowed for a moment before there was a large burst of smoke and two shadows were blasted into the darkened alley quite forcefully. The two took a moment to catch their bearings, looking rather dazed from the unorthodox transport before standing up and checking their surroundings quickly. Finally the slightly shorter of the two made sure to smack her partner around the back of his head before dispelling her summon. "Make sure I never let you talk me into traveling by ceiling scroll ever again, okay?" Naruto just nodded with a sheepish smile. He hadn't really thought it would be that bad in honesty. He just applied the same principle he did with his Fujin no Iki, using the technique that allowed him to seal chakra in order to create a space where they could temporarily hide. Well, it worked, didn't it? And it's not like we haven't been that close before. He tried to placate her, but the irritation in her eyes was quite clear. There's a fucking difference between close and fucking crushed together in a space the size of a fucking closet. Naruto quickly raised a finger to his lips, signaling Tayuya to quieten down as he motioned to the end of the alley they were in. Even now the sounds of city life echoed through the more constant sound of rain pattering down on the streets or into the piping system. Tayuya sighed and nodded. She might have been stubborn and free-spirited, but she understood when subtlety and tact were required, and recon missions were such times. They both quietly walked out into the streets, instantly blending in with the crowds with their nondescript rain slickers and covered hair. Both of them had left behind anything that might have identified themselves as shinobi or foreigners. As far as Naruto knew, there wasn't really any single nationality from Am, or at least one that was vastly different to Suna. The only thing that might distinguish them was their tanned skin, as most people in Am were relatively pale, most likely from the constant clouds that smothered the sky. Tayuya fixed that by weaving a slight genjutsu about the two of them, simultaneously lightening their skin and removing Naruto's whiskers. For all they knew, they were in enemy territory right now, and they were the single most identifying factor about Naruto that might give him away. As they moved through the village, they couldn't help but be slightly intimidated by the imposing architecture, not that they showed it. It was quite different than anything they were used to, as they knew villages to be quite low and spread out, while Am was relatively small but stretched into the sky. When they were alone, Naruto created clones that hanged into various random civilians before spreading out through the village. They would listen into conversations and dispel to give Naruto the information they gained. Tayuya was there if the need for interrogation ever came up. She found her knack for that working under Sasori. It turned out people were quite loose with their tongues if they believed their body was slowly melting away beneath them. After half a day of walking around and not getting any useful information, the two of them stopped off at a small restaurant, out of the way enough that they probably wouldn't ask many questions. They gave a small smile to the woman working behind the counter of the little shop, which was returned by a slightly curter version. They ignored the somewhat unfriendly gesture and ordered some food, both of them not really having much to say to the other at the moment. Naruto kept glancing around as his gaze passed across a strange paper idol hanging on the wall where it wouldn't be dampened by the rain. He remembered that his clones had seen similar paper idols dotted around the village in various establishments like the one they were eating in. Now that he actually looked at it closely, he realized it somewhat resembled a person, at least if they had wings and a halo. "Excuse me, but I've noticed those paper idols around the village. What do they mean?" The woman stared at him for a moment with furrowed brows while Naruto quickly clarified. "My girlfriend and I are visiting family in the village. We're from one of the smaller villages on the border with the Land of Wind." The woman continued to stare before nodding with a small frown. However, when her gaze flitted to the paper idol on the wall, a tiny smile lit up her face for a moment. "It's the sign of God's angel, letting us know she is always watching over us for him." Naruto gave a bemused smile but nodded all the same, knowing when not to press for information if he didn't want to seem suspicious. The two finished their meal shortly afterwards, thanking the woman before pulling up the hoods of their anoraks and stepping back out into the rain. They looked around for a moment before Tayuya turned to Naruto, who just seemed to be looking off into the distance. "So what now?" Naruto pointed off towards the other side of the street where a sign stood on a metal pole with various directions to sites around the city. "How about God's Tower? Check out this stuff about the angel." Tayuya just nodded. It wasn't like they had any other leads at the moment, and usually the largest buildings were the most important, so they could probably get some information anyway. "Yeah, sure." When Tayuya had mentioned large buildings being important, she definitely did not have this in mind. The tower was positively enormous, stretching so high into the sky that it hurt to crane their necks at the angle required to see the spire high above them. They could only imagine why a megakur would need a tower so high, even if they hadn't noticed it before now somehow. Taking a deep breath, they hesitantly tried the front doors, actually shocked when they swung open without much protest. They had noticed that despite the looks of admiration from the villagers aimed at both the tower and the angel edifices, people seemed to be avoiding the tower entirely. That was true for the inside as well. It was more barren than a stretch of the Suna Desert. Naruto found himself strangely happy that the inside of the building did not match the outside. It maintained its neo-Gothic style, but the construction seemed less random and there were no pipes ferrying rainwater every which way. Right now they were at somewhat of a loss at what to do. They hadn't been expecting the building to be empty. It made finding anything somewhat difficult. Luckily, or unluckily dependent on viewpoint and hindsight, their problem was solved fairly quickly. The winds inside the room suddenly picked up as papers that appeared out of the walls themselves suddenly flocked together in the center of the room. Naruto was instantly thrown back 10 years to when the exact same thing had happened during his attempted escape from some bandits. In a few seconds the paper took on a human form before solidifying, gaining color and slowly becoming more distinct until a half-formed woman floated in the center of the room. Her skin, clothes and blue hair all still looked like they were composed of paper, flaking ever so slightly. Her body just ended at a certain point in her robes, becoming more loose sheaves of paper that floated a few feet from the ground. The most remarkable thing were the two large wings, also made of paper, that extended from her back, truly giving her the appearance of an angel. Konan. The blue-haired woman only offered a fleeting smile. Hello Naruto, it's been a long time. The blonde could only stare at the woman in shock and disbelief. She was the one who saved his life all those years ago. She was also the reason he had met Tayuya, who he now couldn't imagine life without. Except for Gaara, Fu, Tayuya, and Kurama, she probably had the single greatest impact on his life for the better. And now she was standing in front of him, as a member of Akatsuki and his enemy. But why? The blue-haired woman just offered a sad smile which was soon swallowed by her usual impassive mask. I might be able to explain to you our past, the reasons why we fight for our vision of peace, but it would be better to hear it from somebody else, someone who you will understand. She floated slowly to the ground, her legs reappearing as her paper form became more solid and her wings dissipated as the individual sheets of paper flew away around the building as little paper aeroplanes. Naruto and Tayuya weren't sure what to think. Konan was supposed to be their enemy, but right in front of them she was lowering her guard. After a moment of hesitation, Naruto relaxed, drawing his body out of its well-conditioned fighting stance. Tayuya shot him a wary look, but he just shrugged. Konan had saved his life all those years ago. The least he could do was give her the benefit of the doubt this once. Gaara had told him to avoid unnecessary conflict, and that was exactly what he was doing. Tayuya just sighed as she replaced the bow staff she had drawn on her back and also relaxed her body. All right, lead the way. Konan nodded with a small and weary smile before turning on a heel and walking down one of the corridors. Tayuya and Naruto warily followed her, but not before the blonde quickly applied a Fuijin no Iki seal to the floor of the foyer. They jogged to catch up to the woman, walking besides her but staying out of her reach just in case. Naruto was ready at any moment to activate his swift release in response to even the slightest signs of a trap, and Konan noticed the tension in their postures. I assure you that under this roof no harm will come to you. The god of Am has decided it is time you and he met. Naruto furrowed his brow as he continued to walk alongside her. The god of Am? You mean the leader of Akatsuki? Konan nodded quickly, walking along in silence. Naruto did as well, but his mind was clouded by confusing thoughts and memories. When you saved me, all those years ago, were you a part of Akatsuki? Konan nodded again, a short, curt movement. Then why? Why save me when you knew what I was? Konan just smirked in amusement before the momentary gesture was swallowed by the mask again. Akatsuki was not always as it is today. Our goal was never always to seek out the Biju. Naruto furrowed his brow, wondering what had caused them to change their mind. As I said, there is somebody who could explain it better. She turned her head to look right at him, once again letting him see her eyes shine orange for a fraction of a second. When I saved you, I had no idea what you were. You were an orphan, that was all I needed to know. She returned to staring ahead at the corridor in front of them, letting silence wash over them. Eventually, after winding their way through the extensive tower and climbing what seemed like an infinite number of stairs, the three of them entered a large chamber. Right in the center was a large machine supporting a frail and emaciated man with long red hair falling across his face in a limp sheet. His body was thin and his bones were visible beneath his skin. The machine he was in seemingly restrained him, or more likely supported him at the arms and the legs, giving him a slightly hunched over appearance. Most strange were the many large black rods sticking directly out of the man's back, which Naruto instinctively knew were the same as those Pain had used as weapons. Naruto Uzumaki. It's almost ironic, really. His voice was gravely, not unlike Gaara's, but his words held more emotion. They were also slightly deeper. Ironic that in the end my vision for peace was stopped by my own blood. In another time we might have been friends, family even. It was only a few words, but already Naruto's eyes widened as his slightly tensed fist hung limply to his side. Do you hate me, Naruto? The blonde just trembled, unsure of what to say. I don't know you. The man blinked slowly, taking time to process the information as his face remained set in a mask of sadness that clung to him like a cloak. I am Nagato, Nagato Uzumaki. War orphan of Am, student of Jiraiya of the Sannin and murderer of Hanzo of the Salamanders. You would know me as the current leader of the organization Akatsuki. Naruto's eyes widened even further. Of course he knew the man might be lying, that it might all be a ploy to lower his guard, but here he was, standing across from possibly the only blood family he truly had left in the world. Uzumaki, how? Nagato looked up, his rippled eyes now clearly visible as he gained a small gasp of recognition from both teens. My mother was a refugee from Azushiogakure, although I did not know that for many years after her murder at the hands of Leaf Shinobi. Naruto's fists clenched back into balls. He was an orphan like him. My Rinnegan, the dujutsu you see in my eyes, activated that day. Since then it has been a curse and a blessing, giving me power. He looked down at the machine that supported him for a moment as he paused, and crippling my body. Naruto understood the burden of a power that was both dangerous and powerful, something that he had no control over. In so many ways he and Nagato were alike, yet they had gone down such different paths. How? Nagato looked up at Naruto, their eyes meeting for a moment before Naruto continued. How did it get to this? You of all people should know the pain and misery that violence brings, yet you want to hurt those because of something that they had no control over. People like me or Gaara and Fu. We never wanted to be Jinchuriki, but we make do, finding precious bonds where we can just to keep living, having to prove to the world that we aren't the so-called demons we contain. Nagato blinked slowly, once again absorbing what the younger Uzumaki was telling him. Your friends, they are important to you, aren't they? You would do anything for them, even sacrifice yourself for them because you believe in them and what they stand for, because you care for them more than anything else in the world. Naruto just nodded solemnly as Nagato continued. I too had bonds like that once, precious people that mean the world to me. The war took that away from me, greedy men who understood nothing of pain and suffering, who didn't understand the lives they were destroying as they quarreled over petty grievances. Conan looked away at this point, her mask finally breaking as a small tear found its way to the corner of her eye. This is how the world will know peace. Once everybody understands true pain, true suffering through fear, then they will know the consequences of war. Naruto frowned as his fist shook. How could you think that? What makes you any better than them if you plan on killing so many? How many has the Akatsuki killed already in this plan for peace? Hundreds. Thousands. I may not know Jiraiya very well, but that can't be the dream he wants. People have to understand each other, find bonds through love that can defeat their hate. Nagato sighed deeply as the machine around him moved so he could better look at Naruto. You are young, and while you think you have experienced suffering, you still maintain that naivety. It is a fool's dream. People will always harbor hatred, always experience greed and anger. That is what makes such bonds special in the first place, and also why losing them devastates lives. Naruto hung his head, letting his unrestrained hair fall over his eyes. I understand that you must have lost somebody precious to you, that your life was probably even harder than mine, but that's no reason to give up on humanity. You should fight harder to save it. Nagato let out a humorless chuckle, his frail body shaking from the minute exertion. Your words are inspirational, you carry the spirit of our clan, but people are not changed in a day, words alone will not change the hearts of men. I hate war, it took everything from me and I loathe the world that allowed it to happen, that will not change. In honesty, a part of me hopes you are right, that you can find a way to peace that I could not see in my hatred-clouded vision. I am sad that I may never live to see it. He hung his head sadly, although it wasn't much of a change from his normal expression. My body is weak, my abuse of power has taken its toll, and even the strength of the Uzumaki blood that flows through both of our veins cannot help me. I will die soon, leaving the world with nothing more than my legacy, the destruction I have wrought through my paths and my singular attempt at attaining peace. A small smile finally graced the older man's lips, his gaunt cheeks turning up slightly at the gesture so unfamiliar to his face. Good luck in your own path to peace, Naruto. I once asked you to look after a young orphan, purely because I didn't want to see another lonely girl have to grow up in a world that she would one day come to despise. I wanted you to save one person from the life that I lived. He turned and looked straight at Tayuya as she looked back at the man who had brought Naruto to her, giving her life meaning, however indirectly. And you have done exactly that. Even if I die tomorrow, I die knowing that my actions have at least brought one person happiness. That would be what Yahiko would have wanted. But why do you have to die? Let somebody help you, I'm sure Lady Tsunade would. Nagato looked up, letting his rippled eyes gaze directly into Naruto's own, piecing him and making the blonde stop mid-sentence. That's enough, Naruto, my time is coming to a close. I wanted to talk because I wanted to see how you would react to the cause of your pains being right in front of you. You have shown me compassion, despite being your enemy, you have shown me tolerance in letting me tell my story, and you have shown me understanding, even if it was in a slightly naive way. If there is anybody that can achieve what I could not, then I believe it will be you. Jiraiya-sensei once told us something right before he left, that even though we weren't from Konoha, we carried in us the will of fire. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I believe I see that in you now. I'll do it. Nagato looked up in surprise, narrowing his eyes in Naruto's direction. If there is no way to true peace and you're right, then I'll make one. As long as there are people in this world that are worth protecting, that believe in me and will support me, I'll never give up. I won't just do it for them, I'll do it for you too. Nagato let out a small gasp of surprise. I want you to see that you're wrong. I want you to live to see the peace that Jiraiya wanted so much, and that's a promise. Nagato blinked slowly before closing his eyes and exhaling softly in a sigh. You could help people, use your powers to stop wars and end suffering instead of causing it by hunting the Jinchuriki. I know you could be healed, I'm sure Lady Tsunade could do it, and if she won't, then I'll make her. Tears had begun to gather at the edges of Naruto's eyes. We're so alike, our lives are like the same story told with different characters, and you're the last family I have. I would be dishonoring my family if I did nothing to help you. Please let me help you. Nagato looked down, staring at his own frail body, the machine that was the only thing keeping him upright. Your eyes, even in all this confusion, all this hate and suffering that surrounds our lives, your eyes are clear. In all my pain and hatred towards the world, I forgot what Jiraiya-sensei taught me, the very spirit you seem to have found on your own. He sighed again as he looked down at Konan to his side. It seems that even with the eyes of the sage of the 6 paths I was blind, maybe you can see more clearly that the Rinnegan. The smallest of smiles tweaked at the edge of his mouth. Maybe it would not be so terrible to finally try and let the hate go. He turned, the machine once again allowing him to move his body to look down at Konan. I'm sorry, Konan, Yahiko would never have wanted this, I've failed him. The normally emotionless woman stared at her old friend in a small amount of shock and amazement. Nagato, she sighed, he would have understood, he always understood. Nagato nodded slowly and sadly as thoughts of his oldest friend flashed through his mind. He gulped and took a deep breath as he turned back to where Naruto stood. Naruto, please help me. Naruto stared across at the silent blue-haired woman who just calmly stared back, neither of them backing down as they held the other's gaze. They had been forced to move to another room while Tayuya went over the damage to Nagato's body. Preferably Naruto wanted Tsunade to help him, but Tayuya had pointed out that it would be pointless if she could help him. She may not have been a medic on par with Tsunade herself, but she was good in her own, unorthodox way. Only if she felt that she could do nothing for him would they consider asking Tsunade for help. He was still technically the enemy after all. What happened? Konan was surprised when Naruto finally broke the tense silence that had filled the air around them. What do you mean? Naruto sighed, looking in the direction of the chamber where Nagato and Tayuya were. What happened to make him this way? He looked back at Konan again. To make you this way. The brunette blinked rapidly for a moment, processing the unexpected question. She seemed hesitant to answer, but after a few seconds of Naruto continuing to bore into her with his bottomless blue eyes, she relented. Nagato wasn't always the leader of the Akatsuki, that position once belonged to our friend, Yahiko. We grew up together, ever since the war drove us from our families, like our own little family. He had a dream, the dream that Nagato believed he was still following until today. He wanted to bring peace to our home. He formed the Akatsuki to aid him in that dream. He called it Red Dawn because that was our goal, to see the rains finally lift from our home. Naruto nodded slowly, knowing that this Yahiko was very important to her if the way her voice was catching ever so often was an indicator. The previous leader of our village, Hanzo of the Salamander, the man who named the Sannin after they held their own against him, he retaliated against our group. She looked away from him in shame for a moment before dragging her eyes back over to his. He captured me, held me hostage while Yahiko and Nagato could only look on. He promised them that I would be released safely if Nagato killed Yahiko. He refused, holding out a kunai in trembling hands, unable to do it, unable to kill his best friend. Naruto just nodded with a frown, horrified by the decision Nagato was forced to go through with. He couldn't do it, wouldn't. She looked away again, tears beginning to become evident in the corners of her eyes as she relived those horrible moments of her life. But Yahiko, he would never want to see anybody hurt because of him, he was the most selfless man I ever knew. He drove himself onto Nagato's kunai, killing himself, but not before passing on his dream. After that Nagato killed them all the shinobi Hanzo had with him. The man himself escaped but later on, Nagato, By now she was sobbing and Naruto couldn't help but place a comforting hand on her shoulder. At the contact Konan immediately sobered. A lifetime of hiding her emotions and covering up behind a mask was hard to break. She sat a little straighter, wiping the tears from her eyes as she drew away from Naruto's touch. Hesitantly he withdrew his hand, not knowing if what he did helped or not but respecting her wishes all the same. Konan. The paper angel looked up, her eyes now slightly red from her tears. The night you saved me, the night you introduced me to Tayuya. He pulled up the sleeve of his jacket and showed her the small pink petal mark that to this day had yet to fade. Why did you give me this? Konan chuckled lightly, glad for the distraction from her previous tears. She waved her hand over the mark and let Naruto watch in amazement as thousands of minuscule shreds of paper, probably no larger than width of a hair, were drawn out from the mark until it was gone entirely. How did you expect me to make sure you were keeping your promise? Tsunade groaned as she leant back on her comfortable but damnable leather chair, cursing whatever gods were forcing her to go through this ceaseless paperwork. Every time she felt she made even the tiniest dent into all the documents and reports, Shizune would just come in and dump on some more. Secretly she wondered if this was some kind of payback from her longtime apprentice but dismissed it. Shizune was the nicest person she had ever known. Still, it was a pain and she just wished something interesting would happen to break the monotony. Of course she would come to regret those words when a hand lightly touched her shoulder, making her jump almost an entire foot into the air. The Anbu of the room were equally startled by the sudden appearance of somebody who wasn't Jiraiya. Immediately the mysterious stranger with the hood of his coat drawn up over his face was surrounded on all sides by Anbu with kunai pressed up against more than a few vital areas, as well as a not-so-vital area that was precious to him all the same. Whoa Tsunade, I wasn't really expecting such a hostile welcome. Tsunade just groaned as she recognized the voice. Of course Naruto would be the only one brash enough to simply flash into her office unannounced. It's okay Anbu, let him go. The shinobi guarding the room looked at her curiously, but knowing better than to defy their Hokage's orders they swiftly returned to the shadows. Tsunade turned her attention back to the sheepishly grinning blonde as he rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. I guess I should have knocked first. Tsunade sighed but still managed to give a small smile at the sight of her godson. What are you here for Naruto? As nice and interesting as your visits are, I am very busy at the moment. Naruto smiled awkwardly again, unsure of how to proceed now that he was here. He had such a good speech in his head as well. It's kind of a long story. Tsunade just looked down at the mountain of paperwork on her desk with disdain before leaning back on the chair. I have time. Tsunade had a worse headache than the time Jiraiya had properly challenged her to a drinking contest. She looked up at the blonde in front of her before returning her fingers to rubbing the bridge of her nose in exasperation. Sometimes she called Naruto an unpredictable ninja out of fun, but it was times like these where he actually proved her right. She could only begin to imagine how Naruto had managed to get himself into this kind of position. Okay, let me get this straight Naruto, you found the leader of the Akatsuki in Omega Corps. He's a former pupil of Jiraiya, and not only did you not attack him, but you're actually asking me to heal him of some strange injury that has left him crippled. Naruto looked thoughtful for a moment as he tried to remember if she left anything out. Oh yeah, he was also the one who saved Tayuya when I was younger, and Konan saved me. It's how we know each other. Tsunade leant even further back on the chair, threatening to tip it backwards as she shook her head in exasperation. After a few seconds pause as she mulled everything through in her head, she finally stood up, slipping on her coat. Alright, let's get going, I want to make this quick if possible. Naruto gawked at her in surprise, wondering if it was this easy to convince a Sannin of anything. He was going to have to experiment with Jiraiya later, but for now he had to deal with the Anbu dropping down from the ceiling. Hokage-sama, we really must protest. You would be deep in enemy territory and at their mercy unless Naruto can bring you back. Tsunade stared at the single Anbu, but she could tell his views were mirrored by the others hidden in the shadows. And what would you recommend? The Anbu still looked shocked, even if his features were hidden behind his mask. Hokage-sama, please understand that we are only looking out for your safety, and Tsunade quickly raised a hand, effectively cutting the Anbu off mid-sentence before looking at Naruto. How were you planning on getting me to a Megakure? Naruto smirked as he held up a kunai in response, swinging it lazily around his finger as the Hokage and guards got the gist. And how many could you transport using it? Naruto stopped swinging the kunai, holding it up to his chin in thought. Well, theoretically as many as I like, as long as the combined chakra was less than my own, or effectively sealed so it won't be dispersed during the process and mess up my concentration. Tsunade had nodded, worried at first by the masses of chakra stored up in her yin seal, but if it was okay sealed up then she had no problem. I've taken the Nanabe's chakra through before, so I guess it's mine and Kurama's together it has to be lower than. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. Most would be hard-pressed to get even close to those kinds of levels, even as a group. So how many of my Anbu could you take through including me? Naruto shrugged. It was all speculation anyway. It wasn't like he had attempted more than one other person anyway. I guess 3 or 4. Even Tsunade had to look surprised at that. The Anbu were no slouches when it came to chakra capacity, and neither was she. For Naruto to actually believe he had more chakra than 4 of them combined, plus her, it was impressive. Instantly 3 other Anbu dropped from their hiding places as Tsunade turned to the original, pinning him with a demanding look. Is this arrangement acceptable? The Anbu quickly nodded, cowering slightly under the woman's harsh gaze. In the end she was the Hokage and it was her decision anyway. He was happy for even the small concession on her part. Yes, Hokage-sama, if you would give us some time to get prepared, Naruto quickly cut in as he quickly gathered up everybody in the room. Sorry, not time for that. Immediately everybody felt a strange tingling sensation before the 6 people simultaneously vanished from the room. The single root operative stealthily hiding in the corner of the ceiling gaped in surprise. He had a lot to tell his master. Contrary to his usual jumps, everybody managed to end up in a rather uncoordinated bundle on the floor of the lobby in God's Tower. Naruto was really going to have to talk with Nagato about that name. It was just way too egotistical. The ANBU, despite their rather awkward position, managed to quickly stand up and dart off into the shadows. They were doing the job, staying in defensive positions to ensure that the Hokage was protected from any threat. Tsunade also sat up, but in a bit more of a huff as she wiped off some dust from her clothes. What the hell was that brat? I was jumped by your father once and I still managed to stay on my damn feet. All she heard was a muffled groan before she looked down to see Naruto spread out on the floor with her firmly sitting on top of him. She quickly stood up, wiping the tiniest blush off her face as she felt the Anbu snicker at the compromising position. Naruto just stood up in a move strangely reminiscent of Jiraiya as he didn't seem at all injured. Hey, I've never had to transport so many people before. I'll work on my landing next time. Tsunade just snorted before she allowed Naruto to hurriedly lead her through the various winding corridors that made up the strange building. With a small start, Tsunade realized this was the first time she had been back in a Megakure since Hanzo had declared her Jiraiya and Orochimaru the Sannin, simply for not dying against him. Eventually the 2 of them, and undoubtedly the Anbu as well, managed to make it to the chamber where Nagato was resting. It turned out that all Tayuya could do was slightly ease the stress on his body that was causing him pain. She couldn't actually heal his emaciated body. Right now he was resting on a comfortable-looking bed, on his side of course lest the spike dig even further into his back. Tayuya had managed to remove a few of the smaller ones safely, but it turned out that many were now incredibly interwoven with his chakra network, the reason Tsunade was now here. The older blonde could only stare at the frail man, so helpless looking on the bed. She remembered when the Sannin had first encountered the trio of orphans with Jiraiya staying back to train them and make sure they would be able to take care of themselves. The man and woman before her looked so different compared to the innocent young kids she had left behind on that stormy day. She knew they had both seen some terrible things in their lives, just as Naruto, and even she had. Like Naruto, she also realized that he had his reasons for what he did, even if she believed it was wrong. However, if Naruto was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, she was too. She had found the blonde to be a good judge of character so far. She made her way over to the stricken redhead, ignoring Conan as the woman stared at her icily, not afraid to fight a Sannin if it would protect Nagato. So your pain. It wasn't a question. As the man looked up, his hair once again fell across one eye in a sheet, leaving only a single Rinnegan visible. I used that alias when posing as one of my paths, yes. At the time it felt appropriate. Tsunade just nodded curtly. Know that I am only doing this because Naruto asked me. If it were up to me, you would be paying for your crimes as we speak. Nagato nodded wearily as he lay his head back down on the bed. You do not have to remind me that I have made mistakes in my life, but I thank you for at least agreeing to try and help. Tsunade took a breath as she looked over the frail man again. He just looked too frail to be of any real danger, despite the obvious threat his eyes posed. She closed her eyes before her hand began to glow a warm green. You might as well watch this, Tayuya. I can already see what you did and it's impressive for somebody self-taught. Everybody else though, get out. Conan looked ready to object, but Naruto came up behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Tsunade knows what she's doing. She's lived long enough to see plenty. Just give them some space. He heard a growl from across the room as he was forced to dodge under a large chunk of masonry that was thrown his way. I'm a cage brat, show some damn respect. Naruto just grinned as he pulled a protesting Conan out of the room, leaving Tsunade and Tayuya with a now slightly nervous-looking Nagato. Tsunade turned back to her patient, running both her hand and eyes over him critically. Well, I can say with certainty that you royally screwed up your body. Luckily, whatever those chakra rods on your body were transmitting to seem to have been destroyed. That means your body is no longer expelling a constant source of chakra. Nagato looked up at the blonde woman curiously as she clarified. The chakra in your body, at least when not in use, naturally flows around your body. It is what gives energy to your cells and allows them to do their baser functions. Shinobi train their chakra so that it can be temporarily diverted from this, letting them perform jutsu. It is also the reason no shinobi, not even ones like Naruto, can fight forever, as eventually their cells need the chakra to function properly. Whatever these rods were doing, it was like using a constant jutsu. Your chakra was dangerously diverted from the rest of your body. Nagato seemed shocked at the revelation. Don't worry though, now that you have effectively ended the jutsu, your body will eventually readjust and heal itself. Nagato sighed as he rested his head back down on the bed. However, his head immediately shot back up. The rods themselves now pose a danger. For the past few years they have begun to integrate themselves into your chakra system in an attempt to increase efficiency and not kill you. If this had continued for much longer, there would have been nothing I could do, and removing him would be impossible. Nagato returned to his nervous state. However, you are once again a lucky bastard due to that constant fluctuation of chakra caused by the jutsu. It was like the rods were trying to integrate into a chakra system that wasn't quite there. Naruto was lucky to have brought me when he did. If your chakra system had already reset, then there would have been nothing I could do. As it is, he's given me a small window of about 3 days in which I can help you. Nagato sighed in relief, although he didn't get his hopes up based on how the conversation had gone so far. So you can help me? Tsunade nodded solemnly as her glowing hands continued to roam across Nagato's body, making sure she didn't miss anything. She looked up in surprise when she passed it across Nagato's face, or more specifically his eyes. Nagato, did you know that these aren't your eyes? Both the redheads in the room blinked in surprise, as they simultaneously looked toward Tsunade. What do you mean? Tsunade focused more closely, her palm glowing a bit brighter. These eyes were transplanted into you, probably when you were extremely young, based on how your body hasn't rejected them. The person who did it was quite skilled, not a perfect job but excellent all the same. Nagato furrowed his brow as he thought about that particular piece of information. That's impossible. I remember the day I activated my eyes perfectly. It was when my parents were murdered. Tsunade just sighed as she shrugged. Perhaps they were transplanted before then, before you could remember. She thought deeply for a moment. What color were your eyes before they became like this? Nagato also went into through, trying to think back that far. It was such a long time ago now. Black, I believe, or a very dark brown. Tsunade scrunched up her mouth into a frown, trying to think of the implications. That isn't right. As an Uzumaki with red hair, your eyes should have been purple. That's how they all were. I remember that from my grandmother. Black eyes changing into a dujutsu under duress. If I didn't know any better, I would say that was the sign of an Uchiha. Who was your father? Nagato shook his head sadly. He didn't know much about his parents, only that his mother was an Uzumaki. I do not know. Tsunade continued to frown, but she felt this conversation could at least wait, for now she had to heal him. Alright Tayuya, I hope you're ready because we're going to be in here a while. I just hope you're a fast learner because my curve is pretty steep. Tayuya just nodded confidently before the two of them went to work. That was the last thing Nagato saw before he was put under a strong anesthetic. If the situation wasn't so serious, Naruto would have found it quite amusing to see somebody so stoic and emotionless actually pace in worry. Even so, he didn't say anything and continued to allow Conan to walk back and forth between the two ends of the room, even if it was a little annoying. They two of them had been waiting for over 2 hours for Tsunade to come back out with any kind of news, and even Naruto would be lying if he said he wasn't a little anxious. Naruto didn't know why he suddenly cared so much for Nagato. It could have been the fact he was family, or it could be that their lives were so similar. There was also the fact that all his life he had wanted an older brother. He would always consider Gaara family, but it wasn't quite the same. There would always be that childish wish to have an awesome older brother who would teach him cool jutsu or how to be an amazing shinobi. He just sighed to himself as he stretched out on the table he was sitting on, maybe in another life. He watched Conan pace for a bit longer, understanding her worry. Nagato was her last friend, her only connection to Yahiko that remained. If it was Tayuya, or Gaara, or Fu in there, then he was sure he would feel the same way. In fact, he had been when Tayuya was still unconscious after Pain's attack. He had to chuckle to himself. Ever since meeting Nagato, he had separated those two entities in his mind. On the one hand, there was Nagato, the misguided boy who grew up alone and had to watch his best friend kill himself to preserve his dream. He could relate to Nagato, understand him and forgive him. Then there was Pain, the cold, emotionless man who had tried to harm him and his precious people, destroyed his village and attempted to kidnap the Jinchuriki. For some reason Naruto couldn't put those two together in his mind. He figured it helped that the Pain in his mind was now dead. Finally the two were brought out of their respective thoughts as Tsunade walked back in. Alright, he's stable and I managed to remove all of the rods from his back. There was a brief scare when one of them acted up, nearly shutting down his chakra system, but with Tayuya's help we pulled through. At that point a very tired-looking Tayuya emerged from the room, looking ready to drop to the floor. Naruto quickly made his way over, taking one of Tayuya's arms across his shoulders to keep the sleepy girl standing. Tsunade turned to Conan, looking at the woman critically as each stared at the other. He is going to be weak for a few weeks. He should not try anything strenuous like jutsu. She sighed as she looked back at Naruto, smiling at the image of him helping Tayuya walk around in her exhausted state. However, in a few days he should begin to gain mobility in his legs and arms. You should have him walk around carefully at first, but as long as he doesn't try anything stupid, he should be walking unaided in at least 2 weeks. Conan blinked in surprise, amazed at how easily Tsunade had done what nobody else could and at how easy it all sounded. He's really going to be able to walk again. Tsunade nodded with a small smile. It was the best part of her job as a medic to deliver the good news of a successful operation. Conan seemed lost. For the longest time she had been the one caring for Nagato in his weakened state. She almost didn't know what to make of him returning to how things had been before. Finally she settled for the faintest of smiles as she looked up at the older Hokage. Thank you. Tsunade just nodded curtly before turning to Naruto. Alright brat, I think I've been gone from Konoha long enough, time to go back. Naruto just nodded as the Anbu that had been hidden around the room appeared. Strangely Conan didn't even seem shocked. Of course she knew because most of the Anbu had been right next to the various sheets of paper she had camouflaged on the walls. Naruto took a deep breath as the 6 of them held onto one another again. At least this time Naruto managed to stay on his feet as he reappeared in the Hokage's office, once again to the surprise of the single root operative hidden in the room. Naruto ignored him, merely thinking he was somebody left behind to guard the room while the Hokage was away. Tsunade also managed to keep on her feet, even if she was left slightly dizzied by the experience while the Anbu once again shot off into the shadows. Well brat, at least you always know how to keep your visits interesting. Naruto just nodded with a small smile, nodding as he glanced around the room. He was eager to get back. Take good care of your cousin and watch him. Make sure he doesn't go back to how he was before. Naruto nodded again, this time with a small smirk. Hey, he's not just my cousin, don't forget that he's your family too. And with that Naruto vanished without another word, leaving Tsunade slightly shocked with his last words. Upon consideration she realized that he was right, her and Nagato were distantly related. Not to the same degree as him and Naruto who for all they knew were cousins, but still. She sighed with a smirk as she pulled out a bottle of sake from her desk, always keeping it interesting. Of course at that moment Shizune burst into the room with a pile of paperwork half her height, earning a large groan from Tsunade as she slumped forward on the desk. Naruto, please come back. Naruto reappeared in Am with a smirk. It was always fun to leave somebody speechless, even if he didn't get to see it. He made his way through the tower, at least knowing where he was going this time as he made a beeline for the main chamber. He walked in only to see Nagato peacefully resting on a bed, the rods in his back removed and his skin having gained a more natural tone. In all the older Uzumaki just seemed healthier and Naruto was happy, now maybe he could finally stop living in the past and move forwards with his life. He smiled at the scene before he spotted Tayuya calmly passed out on another bed, obviously exhausted from the extensive operation. He figured he would get the details from her later, for now he walked over and sat down on the edge of the bed. He wasn't waiting for long before Conan re-emerged from a side corridor, walking in while looking down at some documents with a critical eye. Am may have been a smaller nation than the 5 major shinobi villages, but they had their fair share of paperwork to deal with too. She looked up at the blonde and if she was surprised at this sudden reappearance she didn't show it. Oddly she offered him a warm smile before setting the documents aside and walking over. I assume you two will be going back to Suna now. Naruto nodded with a sad smile. Yeah, we could stay but I feel we should let you and Nagato recover for a while. Plus it's going to take a lot to convince Gaara that what I did wasn't completely idiotic. Conan raised a single eyebrow, looking at Naruto with amusement. Which it was. Naruto just chuckled and nodded cheerily, they could agree on that. Yeah but it worked out for the best in the end. Conan nodded with her own more controlled smile as she looked over to where Nagato was resting. I haven't seen him rest so easily since Yahiko died. Naruto smiled as he took in the resting form of his cousin. Yeah, I guess it isn't too easy to sleep propped up in a big-ass machine with so many spikes sticking out of your back. Conan shrugged, in truth that was probably part of the reason. She turned back to Naruto with a sad smile, remembering that this was the boy that they would have previously killed in order to obtain the biju he carried. Thank you for everything Naruto Uzumaki. The blonde just gave his signature grin. Consider us even. Conan smirked and nodded, but not before she pulled Naruto into a brief but warm hug uncharacteristically. He was just glad Tayuya was asleep, otherwise she would have seen his bright blush as the blue-haired woman separated from him. You really do remind me of Yahiko, I only wish his body could have been saved. I would have liked to bury him properly. Naruto nodded sadly, maybe if he had known at the time he could have held back on the giant Rasengan, then again he wasn't of the soundest mind. Conan stopped reminiscing for a moment as she produced a ring out of her pocket while simultaneously slipping off the one on her own finger. Before he fell asleep Nagato wanted me to give you these, he believes that in a way you did, defeat, us, so it's only right. Naruto just looked at her quizzically as he accepted the 2 rings, bringing his total up to 8. The Conan and Nagato that you met no longer exist, they have effectively died. Naruto just nodded while Conan held out her hand. Paper from the room quickly flocked to it, folding and crumpling in front of him as it became a simple but elegant bouquet of flowers. Give this to Tayuya when she wakes up, it's my thanks to her for everything she did for Nagato. Naruto nodded with a warm smile as he accepted the flowers, noting that they almost felt real in his hands. He quickly slipped on the 2 new rings, only leaving his 2 little fingers free, Zetsu and Orochimaru's rings. I'll see you and Nagato soon to check up on you. Remember, if you go back to how you were before I'll have to beat you myself. He said it with a large grin as he hoisted Tayuya into his arms, resting the bouquet of paper flowers on her as he waved heartily. I'll keep that in mind Naruto. One last thing, be wary of Toby, he is more than he seems. He winked at her confidently before producing a single kunai out of nowhere, passing it over to her quickly. I'll be fine, if you ever need help, just throw it and I'll be there. Conan nodded with a small smile before both he and Tayuya disappeared into thin air. Conan's eyes lingered for a while on the spot they had been standing before drifting down to the kunai in her hands. It was a symbol of trust between them, one she would certainly not abuse, not after he brought back Nagato to her, at least the way he used to be. She looked over at her friend fondly, vowing to do everything she could to speed up his recovery as she moved over and sat down on his bed. Gaara was idly flicking through some reports on how the repairs were going before a sudden sense of foreboding overcame him, like he was about to receive some shocking news. Right on cue, Naruto flashed into the room in a blur of yellow and red, a sleeping Tayuya in his arms and 2 new rings on his hands. He bore a large cocky grin that Gaara knew would not bode well for him as he leaned forward in his chair. Hey Gaara, have I got some news for you? Naruto walked through the streets of Suna with Gaara by his side. They had taken Tayuya to bed earlier after Naruto explained what she had been through. Gaara was still somewhat dumbfounded by it all, even if he knew that Naruto wouldn't lie about such things. He was walking with his fingers around the bridge of his nose in exasperation. If he could count on one thing, it would be the headache he got whenever Naruto had news for him. You do know what you did was completely idiotic, right? Naruto just sweat dropped, wondering if Gaara had a way to psychically listen to him over great distances. Yeah, but it worked out alright, didn't it? Gaara sighed as he lightly shook his head in disbelief. That, or you just made our enemy stronger by removing a crippling handicap from him. Naruto blanched as he realized Gaara was right before he calmed himself, knowing that Nagato was not his enemy anymore. He had given Naruto his ring. That alone was a sign of trust between the two of them. Even if it wasn't so, Conan was holding one of his kunai and there was a seal in the middle of their lobby. He could flash there any time he liked. You told me to avoid conflict. Gaara shook his head with a light smile. He should really just expect these things from Naruto now. Unnecessary conflict? That wasn't what I meant. If you came across any Akatsuki members, especially their leader. Naruto shrugged innocently as Gaara sighed into his hand again. Hey, can't change the past. Gaara just nodded his head, accepting it. Yes, well, next time you see them I would like to come as well, verify their newfound allegiances myself. Naruto nodded happily. He hadn't expected Gaara to be so understanding about the whole situation, not that he was unhappy about that fact. Alright, so how's the village coming along? Gaara smiled, glad for the change in topic as the two old friends walked around their village, catching up. Back in Am, a single red eye peered out of a hole in an orange mask as it stared down at the bed where a peaceful but vulnerable Nagato rested. It narrowed in irritation as Conan re-entered the room before the air around it began to warp and twist. Soon all but the single red eye walked out of existence before it too vanished into thin air. How very irritating. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.